photo op is done. Tea has been sipped with the president. The woman of the moment, Nirmala Sitharaman, is now in Parliament with her cabinet colleagues. In an hour from now, she will be presenting her 6th budget in a row. It's a record of sorts. Now, this is an election year budget. So, it is an interim budget, a vote on account. But it is an election year when the government has to do a very fine balancing act. The expectations are many, but you have to take care of your fiscal deficit as well. Now, for India's middle class, they are tax-paying citizens. There are 3 priority areas: taxes, job, infrastructure. Question is, will the middle class be priority for the government as it presents its interim budget? That's the question that we will be putting to our guests this morning. But before I do that, I want to understand from young people in this country who run their own businesses what they are expecting from the budget, not just for their businesses, but for them personally as Indian citizens as well. We have 2 young faces. I'm sure you recognize them. Vinita Singh is the CEO and co-founder of Sugar Cosmetics, joining us on the broadcast. Also on your screens right now is Viren Shetty of Narayan Health. Vinita and Viren, good to see you this morning. Good to see both of you smiling. I hope all of us are smiling post 1 o'clock as well. Vinita, I'm going to start with you. As an aam aurat, we'll talk about the business end later, but as an aam aurat, what is it that you're expecting from the budget this year? After all, this is an interim budget, and many people are saying, the middle class citizens of this country should not expect too much.
Hi, Shreya. I'm really excited and anticipating the solid budget this year. As an aam aurat, there are a few things. I think we've all been suffering from the high interest rates, high inflation, and high unemployment. And while, as an individual, it hasn't hurt me yet, sooner or later it catches up with all of us. And I feel that the government needs to spur demand, spur consumption by placing some money somehow in the hands of the Aam Aadmi and Aam Aurat, which could be in the form of tax cuts, which could be in the form of more liberal infra spends, which could be in the form of promoting organizations that can create more employment opportunities. But I think it could be in the form of supporting smaller retailers. But I think it is very important to get back the demand. I know we are one of the fewer economies that is still growing at 7-8% on a very large GDP of $3.8 trillion. But last 8 to 10 months, anecdotally, as consumers, we are all seeing a struggle in our ability to shop. And festives haven't been as big. Fashion, beauty, automotive, apart from high-end cars, all categories, QSR, everything has been hit because of the fact that consumption is lower. So as an individual, I would want the government to think about my employability and the government to think about my ability to spend by placing some money in my hands. As an aam aurat, I think I also feel that we are still less than 20% of the organized workforce. And I think, Indian GDP aspiration of $5 trillion will not happen without this number going to at least 30% of the organized workforce being women. And I do feel that Republic Day theme was Nari Shakti, and the government is thinking about women of India. And in continuation of that, I feel that if there are some special tax benefits to women employees, to women entrepreneurs, it will put more money in the hands of women, which I think will again have a very long-term impact, because half of our population not having employment is a massive problem for the economy long-term. So I think these are my top 2 requests from the government as a, aam aurat.
All right. Then let me take that question to Viren Shetty of Narayan Healthcare as well. Viren, you've just heard what Vinita is saying. For the Aam Aadmi, we'll talk about the health sector. We'll talk about, how life is for young entrepreneurs, why they have troubles with GST and higher taxes, all of that in just a bit. But just looking at it from the point of view of a tax-paying citizen, what are you expecting from this budget? What is your big ask?
See, as a Aam Aadmi, at least with respect to healthcare, because that is the only field that I know, this whole country faces huge out-of-pocket expenses. Yet, for the amounts that you're paying, you are taxed on that. So if I'm paying health insurance premium, there is only up to some 25,000 rupees, the tax deduction. But very little health insurance you can buy for that. So I would expect that as Aam Aadmi buying health insurance, that I should be allowed more tax deduction for that. The other one is there's GST on health insurance at 18%. So I understand the government needs to raise money, you need to tax certain activities, but you should have a very high slab rate of taxes for items you don't want. If you're trying to promote universal healthcare, if you're trying to promote more people getting into universal health insurance, maybe they should think about a lower GST slab for the health insurance premium.
Okay, will that happen? Let's see. But Vinita, as someone who runs a successful business and as someone who looks at startups very closely, what do you hope and expect that the government does? There's lots of speculation, there is a lot of expectation, but does the government have the sort of money to meet everyone's expectation?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge for startups in the last 12 months has been access to capital. The government has a lot of ways to fix that, because 2021, this country had startups getting more than $40 billion of capital. Now that number is sitting at about $11 billion now, right? So it's a very small number. And one of the biggest boosts that I think startups can get is that if the government can talk about the fund of funds scheme that they have, the Startup India Seed Fund, the credit guarantee scheme that they have for startups, and place an amount of money in these, which can directly start rolling into startups without many layers of bureaucracy over the next 12 months, I think a lot of companies will come back from the brink of shutting down to having a chance at survival. So I feel that one big thing the government can do is access to capital for startups. The second thing I think which will impact, what the government did for UPI, I think if it now does for ONDC, which is the Open Network for Digital Commerce, I think a lot of retailers, a lot of Indian brands, a lot of consumers, the overall digital commerce ecosystem will heavily benefit. So if there are certain budgets allocated to propelling ONDC, I think what happened with UPI was that 50% of the world's digital transactions now happen in India. I think that can happen with ONDC because we are talking about the online e-commerce spends upwards of $20 billion. Right now, this number used to be not even $2 billion 5-6 years ago. So upward of $70 billion, sorry. And this number was not even 2 to 3 billion about 10 years ago, right? So I think that is another ask. The third big ask I have is very critical for all startups is the ESOP taxation. I think ESOP taxation has to happen at the point of sale. Any other timing leads to employability in startups being a long-term question mark. And I feel that startups are today, the recognized 1 lakh startups in the Startup India scheme are generating 12 lakh in employment. And that number can potentially go in crores over the next few years as more and more startups end up growing. And this can really solve the employment crisis in India. But it is very important that ESOP is taxed fairly, which is not the case right now. So I would say that's another big one. Again, coming back to Nari Shakti, I think, just women entrepreneurs having easier access to capital in terms of better interest rates through the CG Central Credit Guarantee Scheme. And also certain provisions in the Startup India Seed Fund for women entrepreneurs would be very helpful, because women entrepreneurs employ more women and it can lead to a change in the overall employment rates of women. I think lastly, I would say anything that boosts consumption helps startups. So middle to lower income uh, consumption has really been hit in the last 7 to 8 months because of what I said earlier, which is higher inflation, higher unemployment, and higher, of course, interest rates. So any consumption boost in the economy, which can be in the form of individual tax cuts, can actually make a huge impact in getting the wheel back in terms of consumption growing and getting us onto that road to becoming a $5 trillion economy.
And therefore, Viren, as someone who's also a young entrepreneur, you, of course, operate in the healthcare industry. As a professional, what is the industry hoping from this interim budget? Given the fact, again, that this is a vote on account, and probably things will be geared or designed to catch some votes, not necessarily yours.
Usually for interim budgets, there's not a lot of rocking of the boat that's happening. And globally, the macroeconomic situation not being that great, we don't expect any big bang announcements. As I was saying, we want these intermediate steps to be put in place so that the healthcare sector can do much better. So for example, hospitals take loan that from commercial rates of interest from bank that is only lending for 5 years, 7 years, maybe if you're really nice, 10 years. But hospital takes a very long time to break even and is very expensive. It's a huge upfront investment. Abroad, when you see, any large infrastructure project is funded for 20, 30 years. So that option doesn't exist in India for long-term infrastructure type financing for very expensive and large hospitals. So as an industry, maybe it's not something that costs money. It just means you have to put an enabling resolution to allow such a system to exist where you can have long-term financing for large healthcare projects.
Okay, Vineet, I could see you smiling there. Again, the same question. Is your ask too much? Is Viren's ask too much from a government that is going into an election?
Yeah. I think, I'm an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur will always ask for the moon and be super ambitious. So I will be very ambitious with my ask in the budget. And I think the top two things that I feel I care a lot about and which didn't get covered in the last budget, and I hope this budget they do get covered, is firstly, ESOP taxation. I think it is a long pending critical demand for startups to tax it fairly, because it's a very unfair system right now. The second I would say is that the product linked incentives, which is the PLI scheme for manufacturing, it does not yet cover personal care, cosmetics, and I think some of the biggest global brands coming out of India will be in the personal care cosmetics categories in the next 5 years. So any PLI that the government introduces in these sectors would be quite beneficial, and it'll boost a lot of make in India, sell to the world stories in this category. So yeah, I think these are my two, disappointments from last year, which I hope will get fulfilled this year.
Viren, there is an association for healthcare providers who's saying that allocation for health needs to go up to at least 2.5 to 3% of the GDP. Do you think it is possible? I mean, in an ideal world, yes, but in the world we live in, is that possible? And if it does happen, what does that achieve? And just as we speak, by the way, that's the finance minister of the country walking out of the finance ministry. These shots came from earlier today. Right now, as we speak, she is in parliament. Viren, go ahead.
It will not happen unless people are screaming, shouting in the street and demanding this. Unfortunately, in this country, there are so many other priorities for where the money has to go. Healthcare, there is no great push from the public to have better public healthcare, to have better hospital, even though everyone feels it. In every home, you have someone who's struggling with health issues, but they don't express it loud enough. So I don't see anytime soon the amount of allocation towards healthcare going up, as long as there's not a very large public demand for it.
Okay, but if it does go up to say a 2.5% or a 3%, it's not happening, but if it does go up, what does it achieve?
It obviously very good. See, the truth is that most healthcare around the world is delivered in the public sector. And so the public sector is the primary, it's the number one place where you go if you fall sick. And for vast majority of the population in India, even today, they are going to the public hospital. So the public healthcare system needs a lot more money. Right now, what's happening, unfortunately, is that a lot of this money that they are putting aside for PMJY scheme is ending up in the private sector. Now, as a hospital operator, you can say, fine, why should I complain about it? But I'm also, speaking on behalf of the Aam Aadmi, you want the public sector to do better. You want that money to go into the public sector, into those hospitals, to pay for those doctors, to pay for the infrastructure in the public sector. So I would say that, take from 2.5, 3, 3.5, whatever the percentage is, has to be done to revitalize all the public health infrastructure.
Okay, Viren, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. Vinita, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. Great to speak to both of you.